All right, for this learning objective, we're just discussing the presidential election of 1828. Um, so, what we want to look at is that this election of 1828 of Andrew Jackson winning the presidency was called at the time a political miracle. To others, he was merely a reflection of society's changing mood. To himself and his supporters, his victory was a vindication of the common man. He was close enough to the people to be known by a nickname. His dislike for special interest groups and his desire to be the voice of the unorganized citizenry made him the new symbol, a leader for the public good. So his lack of political experience and the fact that his opponent, John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son, was an incumbent president with far more political experience than he had, made little difference in the election outcome. From the beginning, this president had a small group of informal political advisors known as his kitchen cabinet. His strong personal beliefs as to what was good for the country and his habit of ignoring expert advice led him into many troubled waters. But Jackson, as president, has been rated by many historians as one of the near great presidents. So let's look at this election that happens in 1828. So the campaign for the election of 1828 really begins in 1825, rallying around the charge of a corrupt bargain between Adams and Clay, which we'll go into further details when we look at the two-party system in the next lecture series. Jackson supporters who had formed the new Democratic Party began to organize on the state and local levels with an eye to reversing the outcome of the 1824 election. Jackson capitalized on the new social and political events by establishing the first political grassroots movement in American history. So before Jackson, presidential nominees, candidates wouldn't actively campaign on their behalf. Other people would campaign for them, and the speeches that they would give on their behalf would be in extreme humility, right? But for Jackson, he would actively campaign on his own behalf, and he would be quite vibrant and aggressive in basically championing himself to be president. So in many ways, Jackson kind of gives birth to the modern political process that we see alive and well today in political campaigns. So by late 1827, the first political grassroots movement had been established by Jackson, and he had a committee of functioning virtually every county, every state, every important town, every important city in the nation. So he had a very organized campaign by the time 1828. So he was going to be sure that he wasn't going to lose, and lose by what he viewed as political corruption as he did in 1824. So the election of 1828 saw the birth of a new era of mass democracy, as is talked about in the last learning objective. In the election, many Americans were voting for the first time. Even more important than the extension of the right to vote was increasing interest of the common person in exercising that right. Right? So, for instance, in 1824, you had 355,000 voters cast their ballots. But 4 years later, 1828, over 1,100,000 votes were recorded in this election. So the election of 1828 is really seen as a culmination of this democratic revolution. Many people who were alive at that time felt triumphant as Jackson represented the interests of the common man as they saw from their perspective. Also, as a result of the changes in the electorate, that is the voting population, plus the means of communication, education, and the creation of the second two-party system, different perceptions of government roles developed at this time. So, as discussed, the new political, economic, and social pressures that were building within society culminated in the election of 1828 by leading to a new style and methods of politics. Plus, in many states, the old leaders proved incapable either of holding their power or of passing it on intact to younger men. So names like Hancock, Adams, Morris, Randolph, which had been important in both the colonial and revolutionary periods, had lost their political vibrancy or political magic at this time. At the same time, this new generation of voters had grown up during the American War for Independence with its ideologies. Thus, they had a different view of the country than their parents had before them, and they expected the rhetoric of the American Revolution to apply to them at face value. So, during his presidency, 1825 to 1829, John Quincy Adams, like his father, proved to be an unpopular president who was unable to communicate his feelings or goals to the American people. Consequently, Jackson and his Democratic Party won an easy victory in the Electoral College in 1828, 178 to 83 votes in the Electoral College. And the fact that Jackson was both a great military hero in many ways and also in many ways a very ordinary man helps explain his mass appeal, right? This was the persona that he put forward, that he was kind of both this larger-than-life figure but someone you could relate to. Jackson typified the myth of the American man and success story as he rose from his log cabin environment all the way to the White House. Jackson was closer to the American people than any of his predecessors because of his background. So the way Jackson typified the American success story was that he was a peculiar blend of both pioneer and aristocrat. So basically, Americans appealed to this guy because they felt like, well, if he could do it, I could do it. So he was an early example of developing this ethos, this virtue of the American dream. One could rise from from humble beginnings all the way up to the upper echelons of society. So Jackson was praised for his frontier origins and his rise to wealth and fame without the benefit of a formal education or association with a political faction. Jackson's image was that of what would be considered a natural aristocrat, one who had achieved success by his own efforts. So this is sometimes referred to as a meritocracy, right? He achieved success through his own merit. Thus, the people of the new democracy had picked a military hero as its leader. Democracy was walking hand in hand with nationalism, the rise of nationalism with American idealism, right? And American idealism, again, is someone from a humble beginnings rising all the way up to, well, something as magnificent as the presidency. Hence, Jackson, like his predecessors, Washington, Marshall, Hamilton, and Jefferson, helped create a strong sense of nationalism and pride with this country because of his economic, political, and military accomplishments. In conclusion, the election of Jackson in 1828 was a climax of the strong impulse toward democracy that had swept through the American states. Jackson was the first product of this new system to become president, right? And so really, again, he establishes what we kind of take for granted as the normal state of business in politics, self-promoting, and politicians that you can relate to, right? This is a change in a value system in politics that, again, is typified in Andrew Jackson. So that concludes Learning Objective 2. I'll see you bright and shiny in Learning Objective 3. See you there.